Okay, so this is what the Azure Pricing Calculator looks at. I'll put the link to the URL up here as well. You'll notice on this side we've got products, example scenarios, saved estimates. We'll show you all these features as well. Also to note that you make sure you are logged in as well to be able to use the saved estimate section as well. And then what we'll do is we'll flip over to that in a moment, and we'll take a look at some of the other tools and links that are available in the portal as well in the platform. And then what we'll do, just to show you, while we're talking about costs and stuff, there is a bunch of free resources available as well. So not everything is paid for, but there's also specific free subscription types that you can use various other resources, such as VMs as well. And you do get, limited use of some of these things for free. So use that link there to take a look and try it out. It's really good for testing and training kind of stuff. So the kind of things that you'll get is, you'll get 750 hours per month of certain types of machines. You even get Azure SQL database now as well. There is a free version of that, some storage, Cosmos, and various other things. So you can take a look at that link at the top there. So here's the pricing calculator homepage. And inside there, we've got different options. So we can look at all the products here, all the different resource types, and look at the cost calculations, which we'll look at in a second. We can also look at example scenarios, which I'll show you, saved estimates. So make sure you are logged in as well. You can use this saved estimates feature, which is really useful. And another really useful area is this pricing section here. Some useful links such as the pricing calculator. There's also a TCO calculator as well. So that adds different dimensions such as data center cost, staff cost, comparisons and those kind of things as well. And there's a really good guidance section here on how to optimize your cloud costs as well. So we'll look at some of those recommendations in the next series here as well. And all the different ways you can purchase the Azure plans. They're all free services that are available, how to access those, and all the different other benefits and incentives that are available. So now let's look at some example scenarios. There's some pre-built architectures that we can use to kind of get a gauge of estimates from there as well. So we flip over to here and look at example scenarios. We can take a look at let's say big data, for example. You've got all these different ones like web apps and those kind of things, including the Azure stuff. So let's just take a look at the enterprise data warehouse, for example. So you may say, okay, how much does it cost to run an enterprise data warehouse? And this kind of gives you a good starting point. So if we add that to our estimate here, give that a second, and then let's take a look. Down here, we can see it's added Synapse, analysis services, Power BI embedded storage accounts. So it's kind of the data lake storage, which you kind of would expect for a data warehouse. So then you can tune these kind of to how you need them. You could take a look at, make sure you've got the right regions, because there are regional differences in the pricing sometimes as well. We'll talk a little bit about reserved instances as well, so in a little while. So you can look at that, make sure you've got the latest. It's usually best to have the latest tiers as well, which I'll show you again later. Analysis services, for example, you can tune this. Maybe you don't want a developer instance, you may want a standard one. Let's drop that down to 2. That's the most costly thing here. And then you can kind of just use this as your starting point. So you've got 1 terabyte of data in this case. So that gives you a good idea of the estimated cost of some example scenarios, and how we can tweak that. And another thing, what you should really do is just go down to the bottom of here and look at the currency and just set it to whichever currency you're working in. And note down here, now we've got these options. I can save that, so we can even give it a name. And to rename these things, you can come down to here. And I might want to save that. If I do the save there, I can save it under my estimates. And I can even export that, and I can even share it. So if I click on that link here, I can then go and give this to my FD or customer, for example, or department. Say, right, this is what we think this environment's going to cost, and you can use that for your budgeting. You can even export it as an Excel file. So I've got a previous one here I've exported somewhere. Okay, so we've got the file open, or a file opened up here anyway. It's a different one. But we can use this. We can brand it, we can change it, we can add more details, for example. Modify it, and then use this as a download just to maybe put into a document, or again share with our FD or customers. Okay, so that's that kind of the saving area. Another thing to note in terms of pricing and things is that you've got to look at the different licensing type programs as well. You've got CSP, commerce, sorry. So you've got the CSP option here, enterprise agreements, and also note the dev test pricing here. So this is really useful. So if you have got dev test or Visual Studio subscriptions, you can apply this price and it kind of knocks down your licensing costs. So if you're using SQL or Windows VMs, for example, it will knock the licensing costs down for those, but you do need to have a Visual Studio subscription to be able to do that per user as well. You should also make sure you don't have like production workloads or production data in those subscriptions too. So we'll look at the Azure virtual machines and their disks now in the Azure Pricing Calculator to look at how we can estimate costs for these. One thing to note in the Azure virtual machines is that there's lots of different categories of machines for the different types of workloads that you might need. So there may be some VM categories for storage optimization, storage optimized, CPU optimized, graphics intensive workloads. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at the general purpose ones, and within some of these categories there's different series as well. So you'll have the older series versus the newer series, and it's recommended that you move to the newer series. So if you're using something like the DS, we'll look at it in a moment, there's a V2 and a V5. They'll have slight differences, but the costs there's a lot of cost savings that you can have by using the latest series as well. So if we look at this next slide here, we'll kind of show you what we mean. So if we look at the V2 here, for example, 2-core, 7 gig of RAM in this case, and we've also got some temporary storage, and that's £145 per month in this case. And then we look at the DSV5, so the latest series. This actually, you get 1 more gig of RAM. It doesn't come with temporary storage. You can obviously add a second drive for that if you need to, but it doesn't force you to have one. You can see quite a significant discount on these ones. So it's always a good idea to check the specs that you need and also make sure you're on the latest versions of the different VM series. Within the calculator, you can see, need help finding the right VM. There's also links to take you through. There's also like a questionnaire to ask you what kind of virtual machines you want, and it'll guide you to the right virtual machine size and series and, category as well. So if we flip over the pricing calculator, what we've done is just gone up to here, added the virtual machine, popped up here, and then we can go to view. And we're not using the files anymore, so what we can do, we can delete that if we want to. That's kind of cleared everything, so we can add it back in here. I'll show you. It's going to add it to our core infrastructure for our landing zone, for example. And that's popped up there. And we can see in here, we also get some, so if we can use a different region, for example, we can use some of these offers that gives you significant discounts, in this case 50%. So if that works for you and in a region that you're allowed to use or you can use, then you take a look at that and note that they're limited time as well. So what you want to do is make sure you've got the right region as well for your workload. Do we want Windows or Linux? If we use Windows, the Windows license costs are included in the running time of the machine as well. Any other licenses? Do we want the BizTalk or SQL Server licensing included in that as well? If we do, let's say we want SQL, we've got the option, do we want SQL Standard or Enterprise? You'll notice the price difference is quite significant between the two. So you've got SQL Enterprise here, see that? We've got Standard, drop it down. So make sure you're using the correct license and edition of SQL, for example, if you're going to do that. So let's just use the OS only for now. And then here's the categories that we talked about. So let's use general purpose. You've got the compute optimized ones, for example, F series. General purpose, a GPU, like the NVIDIA ones here. So if we use general purpose, for example, a quick note on that is you've got memory and storage as well. So if you're kind of using data warehousing workloads, SQL analysis services or SQL, for example, you may want to use one of these memory optimized ones, for example. But let's stick with the general purpose, and let's stick with our DS series, for example. Let's use the latest one, of course. Let's say we want 3 of those, and we're going to run them 24 hours a day, every day, and it will give you that price per month. So one of the things to think about is, do we need our virtual machines running 24/7? And when we look at some of the cost optimization tips and tricks, we'll talk about that as well. So just note that this is kind of giving you that option here. Do we have a savings plan? A savings plan is something that we can use unless we've got a CSP type subscription. They're not available in a CSP at the moment. So we'll talk about that again in our optimization tips videos. Just these are different options that you can have if you commit to using some of the resources over time, and you'll get some discounts. And kind of, if we look at this one as well, reserved instances. If we want to reserve these 3 VMs, we know we're going to be using them, and also we know they're going to be used 24/7 every day. And we're going to use them for 3 years. We can commit to a 62% discount, so that's a really good way of saving costs as well. And this one here is your hybrid use benefit. If we have got our own licenses with software assurance, we can bring them to the Azure Cloud and drop our pricing down again. But you do need to make sure you've got the right license types with software assurance to be able to take advantage of that offer. Now, in terms of our disks, let's drop that down. In terms of our disks, we've got 3 VMs here. What kind of disks do we need? We will need disks for all 3 of them. And let's start with a standard 128 gig standard hard drive here. So that comes to, let's have a look. So it's £5 per month for one of these disks. Now we may want to use standard SSD instead of standard magnetic disk, and we'll use 128 gig again. That's kind of a more realistic approach. So you kind of want to be using SSDs for your production workloads. They say use a premium SSDs, but let's just take a look at what works best for you and your storage requirements. We can look at the price differences here. Let's look at Premium V2 as well. You've got all these options here. Okay. If we just stick to standard SSD for your average workforce machines, we'll be looking at that. And then you've got it gives you options here. Now these don't really cost much, and these are in the 10,000. So you could put, I don't know, 100 in there, for example, just to give it some transaction storage costs. Bandwidth intra-region, we're going to be doing bandwidth transfers in and out, so it's going to give you a cost for that. First 5 gig is free. Let's just put 10 in there just so we've got a number, so you can see these costs are nominal usually, and usually you probably wouldn't be going across continents, but you may do. So that kind of gives you an idea of some of the VM costs and how to use this calculator to go with that. So again, we can drop these back down to pay-as-you-go for our standard options, and then we may want to reserve them to get that 62% discount. And you can pay that, it'll build it into your monthly cost, so you can just pay the whole thing up front as well. As you can see that cost there as well. Okay, so let's take a look at the Azure storage. So we'll look at estimating costs for Azure storage as well. So we often get asked, we want to store a load of data, whether it's backup data, file share data, archive data, whatever. How much does the storage cost? So let's take a look at some of the options that we've got in the Azure Pricing Calculator to look at that. So we come off here and go to products. We'll take a look at storage accounts, for example. And if we view that, and we can also give this a name as well, so we can call that whatever we want. We can call it, let's call it landing zone or infra, something like that. And then let's take a look again. Make sure you're in the right region, because different regions have got different costs. In this case, let's just use the UK regions. We've got performance tiers. You want premium or standard storage. So this kind of gives you probably the HDD versus SSD version, higher performance storage there. You want to be using the latest version. Do you want hierarchical namespace? So if you're using things like Azure Data Lakes, you want to use that one, or if you just want a standard storage account, use that. And then you've got the LRS redundancies, GRS as well. So if you're using local redundant storage, that will keep all the data within one single region. If we use geo redundant storage, that will spread that data and replicate that data actually to another region. So you don't pay, we pay a small amount for the replication, but then you pay double for the storage as well. So again, something to look at, and we'll take a look at the examples of that. So let's say we want to store 2 terabytes. 2 terabytes of data. We're looking at this kind of cost here. Let's just change our currency. Go back to 31 pounds in this case. They've got some standard write and read operations, kind of typical settings here. So if you think you're going to be doing more or less of any of these, you can tune those as well. You can enable the SFTP option as well for your storage account. So if we leave it like that for now and then take a look at some of the costs. So let's say now we want geo-redundant storage because we want to make sure we've got access to our storage, or or read access even across regions. So if the first region goes down, we don't want to lose the data. So then you can see kind of the costs double there. And then we want to think about, okay, is it hot data? Is it cool? How often is it accessed? So they've got different pricing for the storage types as well. So if we drop that down to cool, for example, you'll see the price kind of halve. If we drop it down again to cold, it halves again. And archive as well. So that's a really cheap storage there, kind of stored offline storage there. So if you need access to that data, you're going to have some kind of SLA, and so you can use that archive option as well. If you just want to store a load of data and you're not really going to access it, and there's not an urgent need to access it. So just to note, you've got different retrieval costs for these as well. So if you're using hot storage, the retrieval costs are a lot lower. So then when you start moving to cold and cool, the storage costs are a lot less, but the retrieval costs are higher as well. So have a think about when you're designing and planning what kind of storage and your storage usage patterns are. You need to take these things into account as well. Okay. Now, if we take a look at Azure Files as well, so you've got a drop down from here, but it doesn't really give you an option to configure it here. So it's, as it says here, Azure Files Calculator. So we need to go into here, go to Azure Files. Let's say we want to store some Azure file share. So yeah, it's a kind of an SMB file share. Is it going to be heavily transaction optimized on this side? Are we going to have lots of read and writes and that kind of performance for that? Or we're going to have the standard hot and cool. Let's just use our standard option here. Capacity, how much do we need? Let's say half a terabyte in this case. Snapshot capacity, and then kind of gives you an idea here for cost. You're looking at $40. Let's drop back to dollars. Let's just change that. £31 per month for that kind of storage. Now you can reserve storage as well. Files, certain types anyway. Files you can, and blob storage. But this only really kick in once you get over 100 terabytes. So once you start storing a lot more storage, and talking terabytes and petabytes, that's when you can get some reserved instance cost savings with your storage as well. So that's a quick look at storage costs in Azure Pricing Calculator. So next we'll look at the Azure SQL database option for how do we do some price estimates for that using the Azure Pricing Calculator. So if we flip back over to our pricing calculator, what we can do is we can add, so it's probably under popular. If you wanted, you can go under databases and see all the different various database options as well. So if you're using managed instance or any of the other ones here, you can use this. But let's take a look at the Azure SQL database. So that's basically a fully managed Azure SQL platform for you. What we'll do here, we'll set the region, what kind of options we've got here. So let's take a look at Elastic Pool, for example. So that's a good option if you've got many databases and ideally with different usage patterns. So you may have, let's say, 20 databases. 10 of them are really busy in the daytime. 10 are really busy in the evening, or various mixture of that. What it'll do is it'll allocate an amount of horsepower for those databases, and then kind of it will use that, and it'll give you a much more efficient cost savings optimization, really. and you've got the vCore and DTU model. So let's take a look at in this option here. So one thing to be careful of with the standard database, when you build a database, whether it's from Data Studio, Management Studio, or the portal, the default database size it will give you is a vCore. I think it's a two vCore database. That's a new default database size. And if we look at the costs of that, you're looking around at that price per database, and we see many organizations who've gone and created a database. They may not be getting used much, or in some cases not being used at all, and they're paying £300 plus per month for those databases. So take a look at the database that you've got. Are they using the right SKU? Are they even being used? And that's a really easy way to save some money straight away. And that's kind of one of the first things that we check. And because it's the default, so you've got to be really careful with the defaults. Let's take a look at some of these options here. So you've got your general purpose, business critical, hyperscale. So you've got these options here. So let's just stick with general purpose, and you can take a look at the different versions. You've got links here to find out more about these options here. You've also got provisioned versus serverless here. Serverless is also a really good option for cost savings as well. So if we drop that down, you've got the option of how many cores you want, minimum versus maximum. So we can drop that up to, bump that up to 4, for example. You can tune the memory and also the storage and how much time that database is going to be running for. Now, if that database is, you've got the option. So let's say the database is quiet, it's not being accessed for an hour or two. What happens is that the costs for that database will stop. You'll still pay for the storage. And that's a really good way to save some money on those ones. But your applications do need to be able to cope with that, because once the database is accessed again, it may need a little while to spin up again, and it's usually less than a second, so it's not an issue. But your application needs to be able to handle that. The first call may not be successful, therefore you need to make sure you've got retry logic as well inside your applications, and then you'll be able to make use of this serverless feature, which is a really good way to save a lot of money on your databases. Assuming it does have those quiet hours where it's not being used, you can use that option. That will save you a lot. So let's look at a standard option here, the DTU. So that's the database transaction unit. It's kind of a blend of CPU, memory, and storage performance here. You've got the different options here. So basic, standard, you probably use that for testing, whatever, but you wouldn't really use that in a real environment. You may want to start with a standard, and you probably want to start with a S2 or S3 or above. And these ones, as you get started, play with them. So give you an idea. Let's say we need 4 databases. Do we need redundancy? Let's say we don't in this case. We're going to be running them 24. You can't stop these databases by the way, just like you can with the serverless ones. So these are priced. You can resize them. You can use automation to resize them. So if you've got some kind of schedule, you say, we know during these hours it's quiet, you could use an automation runbook or something equivalent to resize those databases, and again save costs that way as well. And you can also do reserved instances. That's the other thing with the vCore model. So you've got vCore, then you can do reserve that as well. So a few ways you can save money. And again, with the licenses, you can use a hybrid use. So if you do have the SQL Server licenses on premises and you've got the software assurance, you can bring those in to help save costs further there as well. Okay, and don't forget, you've got the backup options, how many backups you need, how much data are you storing. It's probably going to be more than 2 gig. And you've got your retention, your backups as well. So let's say we want 4 weekly backups, and we want 3 months of monthly backups. May not need any yearly ones, but let's just add one anyway for the estimation. And that gives us kind of a rough cost of what our database is going to cost on a monthly basis. So then we could, look at that and tune it as we need. Again, that's using the vCore model. So if we drop that down to DTU model, that should drop down as well. So you can kind of see the savings if we just that are available by using the correct options and the correct SKUs. And that's one of the issues that we see in a lot of environments where people have just selected the wrong thing or just gone with some default option, and they're paying, 3 or 4 or more times than they should be. So now we'll look at management and monitoring using the Azure Pricing Calculator. So try and estimate some costs for that. So as we're building our platform, we want to take note and get some level of estimates for some of the management features and services that are running in the platform. They might not cost much individually, but we want to kind of capture as much realistic detail as we can, so we kind of know what we're paying for, and then we can look to optimize some of that as well. But first is to understand it. So if we look at things like the alerts, log analytics workspace, how much data are we storing in our archiving? So we may be storing log files. Are we looking at the retention periods? Are we looking at the right storage type? So if they're like archive log files, can we just put them in a cool or archive tier? The different types of access methods, such as Azure Bastion. We've got things like Key Vault as well. And if we're using Azure Automation, Logic Apps, those kind of things, we want to kind of cater for that. So let's take a look at adding some values in there for these kind of services here. So let's start with the first two, which is alerting, log analytics, and those can be found under Azure Monitor. So if we take a look at that now. So log ingestion, that's kind of your log analytics area here. So I've got some estimate. Let's set that first. So we've got some estimates as well. So for the kind of volumes they estimate, around 3 and 10 gig per day for VM. So let's just say we've got 10 VMs for now. It can estimate that. We've got different, applications, analytics. So we've got our estimates for our VMs here, and then we can have our basic logs. So when we send in diagnostic logs and things to our platform, so we may have Key Vault, networks, NSGs. We want to be sending something to our log analytics to make sure we can track everything. So let's add a couple of gig of that per day. And then we've got retention options as well. How many months do we want to archive these logs for? We can see that here. Searching and those kind of things. So we can tune a lot of this stuff here as well. So, are we sending that these logs somewhere else? So we're sending it to an event hub. Let's say we send in a couple of gigabytes per day to Event Hub or somewhere else, or to a third-party service or system, and those two are kind of the same price. So let's just say we're doing that, and then you've got some of the other options are available here. Application insights, how much are we storing in logs there? Alerts as well, something to keep in mind. So let's say we've got 50 resources, we may have some alerts set up on those as well. So you've got the costs here, but we want to make sure we've got something in here for costs as well. So log signals, things that are like health resources and those kind of things, health of resources, sorry. So how many of them are we checking? Let's just put 100 in there, or let's put 10. I think it's like that platform stuff here. How frequently do you want to check? Obviously, the less frequently, the less it's going to cost. So, you've got to make sure you tune these things properly as well when you do set up these alerts. Any creations or tickets and things, kind of things. So here, and you can see we get 1,000 emails free as well, plus some push notifications and webhooks. But we can also add more to that if we need. These things don't cost that much, and you do get 10 voice calls and SMS calls as well. So yeah, so that's actually available as well. So let's say we want some SMS messages per month. If something goes wrong, you might want to send an SMS message. So kind of that's kind of some notes on Azure monitoring. When we look at our cost optimization section, we'll look at some of the options available in the log analytics workplace as well. So where you can set the retention, the daily cap as well on how much logs to store in a day. Those kind of settings are available in the log analytics as well. And then you've got things like automation. Let's take a look at automation. I mean, you get 500 minutes for free as well in the automation. So the update management is kind of free there. Let's look at process automation, and you'll see you've got 500 minutes free as well. So even if we had 1500 minutes, it just adds a little bit of cost on there as well. So we've got something in for that. What else was there? Bastion was the other one. So let's take a look at that. So we can use Bastion as part of our management of our environment as well to access any VMs or infrastructure in our environment that we may have secured that's not accessible over the internet. So if we're not connected via VPN, we may want to use Azure Bastion. So we've got the basic and standard tiers. So make sure you pick the right one. There's various features available in the standard tier that are not in the basic. So take a look at the specs and what those are there. We may do a video on that one day as well. So now we've got some costs for our Azure Bastion. So standard would kind of double, not quite double, but we'll add some more onto that. That will run 24/7. The standard comes with 2 instances as well. So if you do need more, you can add that and you can see the cost adding up there. So it depends how many users and sessions that we need. But let's just use that basic for now. So there we've added Azure Bastion as well now. So we're kind of we're building up, what our, let's say our basic landing zone might cost, but it's got a couple of workloads in there. So now let's look at networking and security. So some of the features that are available in the platform in the Azure Pricing Calculator to estimate what some of these costs might look like. So we'll flip back to our Azure environment here. So let's close this and let's take a look at networking. So let's say a virtual network that doesn't actually cost anything as a resource. You may start paying when you start sending traffic between one region and another. Let's add something for that, at least 100 gig per month. Let's transfer between these 2 regions. We may want a NAT gateway as well, so you've got a rough price of that. Let's create one. So you can use a NAT gateway to kind of control your outbound traffic as well. So you won't use it for VNet to VNet, it'll be more for your internet bound traffic potentially. It might be attached to an Azure firewall. So let's kind of look at that next. So we just want to make sure we've got some basic costs in there for our virtual network. And then let's take a look at a VPN gateway. So you may have a VPN gateway if you're running a hybrid environment to your on-premises networks. And let's take a look at the cost of that. So ideally you won't want a basic one. Depending on your bandwidth requirements and stuff, you can use the gateway 1 up to 3, 4, 5, and you can look at the documentation to see there's all the different kinds of bandwidth and availability options. So we tend to use the either 1 or 2 AZ ones. So the ones with the AZ on the end of the SKU name means it's got it's set up in availability zones as well. So you get higher availability with these ones. So we tend to go for those as a starting point. So we'll just use the standard 730 hours per month, so a full month. You're looking around that kind of cost there. You can have 10 tunnels as well. That's all included in the price. If you wanted more than that, you can start adding, so you can see the price of each tunnel as you add them. But it includes 10 to start with as well. And you can also add point to site tunnels as well. So these ones include 128. Okay. So we want VPN type, and how much data do we want to send across that? So the VNet to VNet is free. How much do we want to send across? Let's say, let's take a look at that. We're going to send a terabyte of data over that VPN. So we get a realistic cost of what that VPN might cost as well. So that's a highly available VPN gateway there. Now, what if you want to use some of the network security features? So if we look at an Azure firewall, so we might want to use an Azure firewall to direct and control our internal and internet traffic as well. So if we look at UK South again, let's stick to the same region. And now you've got the different tiers, basic, standard, and premium. Each one's got different tiers and maybe some limitations on the basic one. So if we just start with a standard one, in the premium, you've got a lot of extra things in that as well. We'll go into more detail there. Logical units. So we start with one. It's a fully managed service. How much data are we going to pass through that? Let's take a look at terabyte of data that goes through that per month, and that kind of gives you your cost for an Azure firewall. And if you did want to do some of the more advanced inspection IDS, IPS, and those kind of things, we could use the premium version here, and that goes for a couple of £100 there as well. So let's put this back to there as well. So that gives you an idea of what your firewall might cost as well. So we can then also add that to our costs here for environment. And another thing to not forget when you're doing your cost estimates are things like Defender. So when we're talking about security, we might want to enable Defender for Cloud. There's also DDoS protection, so you might want to protect anything with a public IP address, which your firewall may have. If you've got an application gateway or some the front door, you may want to protect that with additional DDoS protection, and that can be added here. But if we take a look at the Azure Defender, so if let's drop these down, and then if we use this, we can see the different services and service plans available as well. So let's say again we're going to protect our 5 servers, and that gives you kind of costs there as well. Containers, if we've got any containers, image scanning, web app services. Let's add a couple of web app services in there. We've got our, what do we have? 4. Let's just go for 4 databases. Then this allows you to protect databases outside Azure as well. And storage accounts, let's say we've got about 5 storage accounts. And kind of gives us an example here. Let's put some key vaults in there as well. So this kind of gives us some additional advanced threat protection for some of these resource types. And what that means is that it will scan for anything unusual in that environment. So, for example, somebody goes into your database or logs into it that doesn't usually log into it or doesn't usually log in from that location, and they download, the whole database or a large part of it, and that's kind of be detected as a non-standard type of activity, and it will give you alerts about those kind of things as well, and kind of notify you. And same with storage accounts and VMs as well. There's some additional threat protection inside those VMs. Looks for kind of malicious types of behavior running inside your environment. So those things are usually a good idea to switch on as well. So here we kind of have an idea of what, let's say, our core landing zone plus some workloads in there as well, kind of a monthly cost on some of these things if we're using the Azure firewall and those kind of services. So that's kind of just a quick overview on how to add some of these different options, some of the settings you've got in there, and give you an idea of some of the costs available for each of these things. So in the next video, we'll look at how do we optimize some of this stuff as well. So yeah, thanks for watching.